There's a famous book that has a line in it, and I'm trying to remember who wrote it, but it's listen first to understand, then to be understood in a simple sentence. And it's a good way to lead your life with your family, your friends, and your business.
Welcome back, everybody. Today, my guest talks about a subject matter that I don't think I've ever discussed before. Definitely never on the podcast, maybe not in general in this depth for sure. But Mr. Craig Taylor, the CEO and co founder of CyberHoot, is actually going to share a lot about cybersecurity, about the industry, and how you can protect yourself against cyber attacks, against phishing emails, people trying to steal your data, your money, actually basically hold your stuff for ransom. Really, 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 really interesting. Greg even also shares some information around actually building companies and how to deal with partnerships and some active listening, which you know I am all about. And so buckle up. Think you're going to enjoy it a lot. Let's hop on in with Mr. Craig Taylor of CyberHoot. Please kick us off. Tell everybody just a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a cybersecurity expert. I've been in the industry for about 30 years doing cybersecurity since before there was a World Wide Web. 10 years ago, I founded 11 now, CyberHoot, with some of my dearest friends from work at a previous company. And we tried to set about teaching cyber literacy skills to the world, to the masses. And we're taking a very psychological approach, a positive reinforcement approach that rewards good behaviors instead of what is quite commonly the case, negative reinforcement to reduce bad behaviors. You need both to some extent, but I think the emphasis needs to be on positive. And so that's what we've tried to focus on in CyberHoot. That's where I'm at today, and we're building this thing from the ground up, and it's taken off like crazy.
Nice. I love it. About 30 years in the cybersecurity space. You said before the internet even. What
Yes.
what did what did cybersecurity look like then?
So if you go back 35, 40 years, people were on computers, they were all standalone, but they shared with floppy disks, if you remember, and we had to convince them then you need antivirus. You need a McAfee or a Sophos or whatever that was at the time, right? And then fast forward 5 years, the internet started to come to be, and people were connected for email and they were connected for file transfers and the exchange of ideas in the early internet. Before there was a World Wide Web, there were things like Veronica. Go look that up on ChatGPT. But you needed to convince companies that were plugging into the internet that there were bad actors then. And you needed a firewall. Just you couldn't just plug in and let your computer sit there open to the internet. Microsoft was still coding, potentially vulnerabilities in their operating systems and things of that nature. So, and then back in the Novell days, Novell NetWare, you just couldn't plug in. So I started out as a firewall vendor support agent, fresh out of college with my psychology degree, and I learned every internet protocol. I had a stack of books from the floor to about this high on TCP, IP, bind, DNS, mail exchange records, everything, you name it. I learned it from, just from reading the books. Thank goodness for O'Reilly. And, fast forward 30 years, I'm still doing it, and I'm still using my psychology to convince people to do the right thing around cyber to get the skills they need.
Wow, that piece is super interesting to me actually, that you have a psychology degree, then
Yes.
you sort of went into sales selling firewall software, firewall security, right?
Well,
Uh,
support. I was supporting them
Support.
actually at the vendor, not selling them. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha, gotcha. So the support for firewall. How did that happen? Like where in your life did you immediately start to get interest in technology, in cyber? Like you said, back when, floppy disks were going and emails just getting started.
Yeah. Well, when I was in my early teens, my parents had the forethought to buy me an early Apple IIe computer with a dual disk drive and got me interested in computing then. But it wasn't from a coding perspective, it was more from a practical use perspective. I helped my dad build his first computing um, database, not his database, but populated his dental software with his patients from paper records into his computer system. So I was involved in computers all the way up through college. And after 4 years of university, I was done. I didn't want a PhD or a master's in psychology. And I was searching for jobs. I needed a job. And I found a firewall vendor looking for someone that knew anything about the internet, whether it was SMTP, email, or otherwise. And I had volunteered throughout my university career at the computer lab. So I had been tacitly exposed to VAX systems and keyboard-based emails where you hit R to reply and F to forward, and you could type faster than the email keyboard. The screen would update. Back in the modem days where you could
For
connect to
sure.
the internet via modem. So that turned me into cybersecurity, and from there, it's just been a whirlwind. They don't outsource cybersecurity people to other foreign countries. They keep it in-house in the United States. So that was a benefit because there was a big outsourcing uh, flurry in the late 90s during the dot-com boom and that sort of thing. I was safe from that. And I said, oh, I should really double down on cybersecurity. So I did. I got my CISSP, which is the de facto certification in cybersecurity, back in 2001. So I have a 5-digit CISSP certificate number, and now they're into, gosh, they're probably over 1 million now.
Oh wow. So you say when you say you have a 5-digit one, that was early days when there's now over 1 million people
Yeah.
certified, huh?
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Oh wow, that's super interesting to me, actually. But nice, bubble who boomed or bubbled
Yeah.
and
And
burst. Yeah,
burst.
dot com. Man, yeah, I mean, what happened actually to you then, right? Because you said you decided to double down. Like, this internet thing is now coming around. Let me double down. Let me get certified. How did the actual dot com burst affect you?
It really didn't, honestly. I went to work for a multinational. It was a large IT outsourcer called CSC, Computer Sciences Corporation, 1999. And we built a web hosting arena predating AWS and some of the other hosting providers that are out there today. And we had to follow the sun model. We had a data center in Newark, Delaware, one in Copenhagen, and one in Sydney, Australia. And the idea was during their 8-hour days, they would help and support. Didn't pan out that way, and we learned a lot of really valuable lessons about overbuilding security because there was no rule book, there was no O'Reilly book. Hey, if you build a web host, here's what you got to do. So we had, different flavors of firewalls at different tiers of the infrastructure. We had network IDS and host IDS, intrusion detection systems, and we overbuilt it. So it was difficult to support. After a bunch of trial and error, we probably got it just about right. And then AWS came on the scene, and that was, not the end of it, but there was a lot of folks that moved over to AWS and continue to. They have a pretty big lock on that industry now.
Yeah, that's crazy. When did Amazon actually launch AWS? How early days was
Ooh,
that?
good question. I couldn't tell you what the launch date was, but they were definitely impacting our bid and proposals in, say, 2010, 2012, 2015. I left in 2015, or yeah, actually, I founded CyberHoot with my colleagues at 2014, kept a full-time day job while we built it for 5 years. And so, yeah, so I got a little bit out of that, or further away from it. Now we host in AWS, funnily enough.
Oh, do you? Wow,
Yeah,
AWS was actually stealing your business back in the day, and now
yeah.
you've
And
you've
now
switched over to
CyberHoot's in it.
actually.
Yeah.
Wow,
They just do a
interesting.
really good job of it.
Yeah. Craig, something you just mentioned is so that you guys started to build CyberHoot, what was it, 2015?
2014, we incorporated, and we started our first foray into building a platform to teach cyber literacy then, yes.
Nice. Okay, 2014. And you said you still had a full-time job also to
I did,
support
yes.
you, the family, the company. What was that like? A lot of times people ask me, like, should they just jump straight into entrepreneurship or should they try and do a side hustle, but then they split their time? I mean, what's your opinion? How did it go for you?
Well, if you fast forward to today, I own 100% of my business, or I own my 50%, and my co-founders own the other 50%. And so I like that a lot because it's my retirement plan. It's going to continue to grow. It's doing very, very well. The alternative to having a full-time day job and building this sort of a skunk works or a garage works is you got to take outside funding so you can pay your employees and stuff. But that has some unfortunate side consequences that you have to generate revenue faster than you might otherwise want to or be ready for. In other words, we were able to pivot twice in our company's history. Once was we started with policy management. So we would send out a governance policy like a WISP or a password policy or an acceptable use of computers policy and secure signatures. That was the only module we had. And we quickly realized that did not meet the needs of the industry or the market. It wasn't a saleable product, didn't have product market fit. So we pivoted then to include videos because that makes sense. People watch videos, short ones. We could we actually curated content. We didn't build our own videos for quite a while, and that allowed us to have a saleable, marketable product. Then we try to branch out into phishing, fish testing, and we did it the traditional way that the market did it. Negative reinforcement, fake emails, no notice, and if employees click, they fail the test, and they're punished with more video trainings. We quickly realized that was difficult and it was cumbersome, and we weren't as good as others on the market. And we thought to ourselves, I went back to my psychology days, right, Wayne? I said, okay, what is this? What's really happening here? People get sent something training wise. If they click, they fail. That means they're trying to reduce these bad behaviors. Bad behavior reduction is negative reinforcement theory.
Yeah, yeah.
Operant conditioning is a fancy word for two sides of a coin, positive and negative reinforcement. To explain it to anyone listening to this, you can train a dog with a shock collar or treats, food. And most of the time, the dog and the owner and everybody watching likes treats and they don't like shocks. Not only that, shocks only work to a certain extent, right? If you have an invisible fence on your property and there's a skunk, squirrel, raccoon across the road and the dog sees it, they're just going to go for it. And to hell with the shock, because this is way more interesting than that. And that's true of phishing. When you get a really good phishing email in your inbox, in the absence of knowing what the good behaviors that might stop you from crossing that line and clicking, if you don't know what those are, the good behaviors, you're going to still click because it's too enticing and you can't resist. And then you fail and you're punished. And then you actually don't blame yourself. You blame IT for sending these nasty emails to me. And, unless it's a real fake, a real attack, and then, all hell's breaking loose. So we pivoted at that point. The second major pivot was to create a positive reinforcement phishing test that walks you through an email and asks you to choose safe or unsafe indicators for the 7 pieces of the phishing puzzle, which if you put together, you get a crystal clear rubric to follow every day in your inbox. You can look at an email and instantly know if you're under attack. So I like to say we now teach people how to fish, feeding them for a lifetime. The rest of the industry feeds you a fish for today, hoping you won't click today.
Nice. That's an interesting analogy, actually, that you're taking, phishing. How would you define phishing for us? Just real quick, so everybody make sure
Real
that
quick.
we know what we're
So,
talking about.
so phishing is, and by all accounts in the security industry, including some of the longitudinal analysis by Verizon Data Breach, it's the number one way companies are breached, and it is social engineering delivered in an email, enticing you to react and click on something you shouldn't. Because by clicking on something, basically these emails come in through the firewall, through all the security measures, they get to your inbox, bypassing all the security that's out there, maybe even some endpoint security on your computer. And if you click, you're actually going to visit a malicious website or pulling malicious code down or introducing ransomware into your account or opening an email that might prompt you for your credentials that is on a fake website where they harvest that so now they can log into your own account. There's a variety of potentially damaging things that can happen when you click on a link you shouldn't. So that's why the industry has said we got to stop that, right? Very linear thought, stop the click, right? But doesn't teach you enough knowledge, right? And educate the users on why. They ultimately want to know why, because as I've said to many other people, and you might agree or disagree, Wayne, tell me what you think. Cybersecurity in and of itself is classically people don't know what they don't know. So they're just online doing their thing and they feel safe and secure, and it's IT's job to protect me. But
Yeah,
no, you're actually naked online a lot of the time and you don't know it. And you're
yeah.
just one click away from disaster. So if we can teach you why you're at risk and how you're at risk, and there's the hallmarks or the rubric to apply to your email, you're going to be miles and miles ahead and approaching this thing we call cyber literacy,
Nice.
as in comparison to computer literacy, financial literacy, reading literacy. Everybody has an understanding of what that literacy term means, but applied to cyber, no one has it. You don't get taught in
No.
school. There's not any educational program out there other than cybersecurity training that teaches you cyber literacy.
Interesting. Yeah, see, this is something I didn't know because I know I've heard of course, like these phishing emails that happen,
Yep,
right?
correct.
Anybody that's watching the video, I'm just gonna close my window over here because it's making a noise. So I've heard about these phishing emails. I didn't realize that, so they are bypassing security, right? They get through all of the firewalls, and that is essentially why it is how people are the most susceptible to an attack. So
Yep, correct.
CyberHoot, it's interesting to me from the get-go. I was like, well, how are you guys making money of it? Are you trying to just provide education and then you're selling a software at the back end? But it sounds like it's a huge issue that companies need to make sure that their employees are understanding the potential threats of what's going on so
Exactly.
that it protects the entire foundation of all of their systems as everything is digital now.
Correct. Absolutely. It affects us personally as well as professionally. And unfortunately, there's no one that's going to stand up and teach you or educate you other than typically your employer, right?
Sure.
And the employers, the ones that are proactive are doing it ahead of a breach. The ones that are
Mm,
reactive do it after a breach, right? We get a
yeah.
lot of companies sign up after something bad happens. But, truthfully, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure in this case. If you were to spend a few $1,000s training your employees each year, you might avoid a multi-thousand, $100,000, $1 million breach that could occur,
Wow.
depending on the size of your company and what your clientele are.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, okay, so how can you, I want to ask how you can be proactive, how we convince people to be proactive versus reactive, right? But specifically, a big piece of this puzzle that you mentioned earlier is that you guys are shifting your training from fear and negative reinforcement to encouragement and positive reinforcement. So, keeping that in mind, how can we convince people that they need to be proactive instead of reactive?
Well, I'll give you a statistic which I think is probably telling enough that most uh, business owners will gravitate to, most leaders.
Mm,
Three largest economies in 2024. The United States was number one. Distant second was China, although it's catching up. Third was not a country, not an industry. Well, an industry of a sort, cybercrime through
wow.
business email compromise, wire fraud, ransomware, malware. All these different things are leading to an economy that is in the trillions of dollars for cybercrime. Uh, it's unbelievable when I say that, but people don't recognize it because guess what? When it happens, it doesn't go reported because you want to hide your embarrassment, right? It's almost like
Sure.
decade ago mental illness. When someone has mental illness, nobody talks about that. You can't talk about that. Just pull up your socks, be smarter, be
Yeah,
tougher,
yeah,
stronger.
yeah.
No, there's a lot of mental illness out there and it needs to be spoken about. There's a lot of cyber crime out there and it needs to be spoken about. Otherwise, you're destined to make those mistakes again. And
Mm,
unfortunately, it's still not in the public eye, even though we see all kinds of public breach stories and we get notifications in the mail. You've been breached, your data's out
yeah,
there, we're going to monitor
yeah.
your credit, all that stuff. But the third largest economy should give you some idea of the scale of this. Another thing that I would say is the FBI has a very common saying. If you bring them into your company, talk about breaches and security, they'll say, there are only two kinds of companies in the world. Those that know they've been breached and those that don't know they've been breached.
Wow.
So you have, as a business owner or leader, you have to think about it's inevitable that I'll be breached. So I need to have great monitoring systems to identify quickly when something goes wrong. But you shouldn't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. You should try to prevent that anyways. With education and user education on the two main methods of breach are number one is phishing and social engineering. Number two is password hygiene. You can do some very simple things like train and test with a positive reinforcement tool like CyberHoot because you're building rapport with your end users, you're building education, confidence, efficiency in their inbox instead of eroding it with the negative reinforcement. Just no different than if you shock collar a dog, your dog's not going to like you very much. You want to treat them, right? Treat them like real
Certainly.
people and give them gamification rewards for doing the right thing. That, in addition to the second is passwords, password
Mm,
hygiene. Adopt a password manager and enable MFA, multi-factor, on all of those critical accounts. Adopt pass keys. If you've heard or read about that, they're great.
mm,
They can't be stolen and reused like a password can. Can't be breached typically like an SMS text message could. So password hygiene and education and training and phishing testing, those two things will eliminate the majority of attacks today because that's like fish in a barrel for a hacker. They're like, anybody not doing those things, I can shoot them right out of the water. Boom, I got them. That's my company.
Oh,
I own them. You'll hear that said a lot by hackers. I own you, right?
oh, wow.
So if you're listening to this, there are some very simple, low-cost measures you can do to address the two biggest threats you face. And then once you get that maturity, you can look at making sure you're patching systems on a timely basis. That's equally important, but it's less commonly exploited because it's so easy to do phishing and password hygiene.
That's what I
And
do.
you can go on from there.
Wow. I like the statement from the FBI, right?
Yes.
Two types of companies, right? The ones that know that they've been breached, the ones that don't know, meaning that everybody has sort of been breached. There's so much
Yes.
cyber hacking and crime going on now that it is turning into the third largest, call it, economy in the
In the
world.
world.
Uh,
Yes.
is really unbelievable. Something I didn't know about either. Is this sort of the reasoning? I'm curious as to why you guys started this in the first place. How did that get going? And like, talk to me about early days at CyberHoot. Uh, I mean, there must have been thoughts about like, are we doing the
Absolutely.
correct thing?
Well,
Everything.
there were a couple foundational stories. First and foremost, Chuck and myself, co-founders, we saw that there was a need to help mid-market and smaller companies. We all came from large corporations. I've worked at a bank, I've worked at a manufacturer, I've worked at an outsourcing provider, but they were all Fortune 5,000. And we looked at the breaches we're hearing about. And it's a lot of smaller companies. In fact, there was another study by Verizon that said if you have 11 employees to 100, you're, X number of times more likely to be breached successfully than the larger companies and the smaller companies. So this was an unserved marketplace, and that's what we focused our attention in CyberHood, creating an automated, frictionless system. So, people that sign up for CyberHoot, the end users don't have to log into anything. They get sent their assignments and they complete them online. The administration is automatic. You enroll your users into our platform through Entra ID or Google Workspace, and our automated training is delivered without you having to touch anything. It sends the videos, it sends the welcome email, it sends the Hootfish, and you don't have to do a bunch of hard labor, allow listing, punching holes in your infrastructure to deliver these fake messages that are very difficult to
Mhm.
deliver to the end user to see if they'll click or recognize it as a fake email phish, ostracizing them or alienating them. So it's a negative negative and it's difficult to do. Ours is 100% automated. And it provides metrics for every last person completing that number one breach method is phishing. Every human being in your organization, when you're assigned a hootfish, gets reminded until they complete it. And we escalate to their management and to senior leadership in a company so that you'll know the 5 or 10% of the people that didn't do the training, the hootfish, like the phishing simulation, and you can track them down. When you compare that to the rest of the industry, they're sending these fake emails, they're punching holes in infrastructure, the users are getting this negative experience. But even then, only half the users open the email providing a metric that they either passed or failed. Because when you open that email, it beacons back to the testing provider and it says,
Mhm.
hey, this person opened the email, and you either pass or fail at that point. Because if you pass if you don't click on anything in that email, right? They all have a clickable link that says, ooh, you've won a prize or you've done this, right? Click here. And if you click, you fail, and you sometimes you're told immediately, other times it takes days and weeks, but you fail it. But then there's 5 or 10% that probably 5 or 10% will fail by clicking on links, typically in averages across industries. 40% will pass because they opened the email and they didn't click. But that leaves another 50% of your population that you have no metric on and no
Interesting.
benefit, arguably limited benefit, but there's just nothing. And often that's your senior leadership who are very targeted with phishing emails, whaling emails, spear phishing emails. So yeah, we get 100% metrics, it's automated, it builds rapport, it builds knowledge, it builds confidence. It's just a win-win-win for every single person. And that's what
Yeah,
I'm most proud of in my
yeah, it
company.
sounds like it. I mean,
It's
set up
benefiting
so
everybody.
seamlessly, benefiting
Yeah.
everybody. It just works super well. And so, swinging back a little bit though, it sounds like what you guys saw there's a gap in the market for
Yep.
this like medium-sized business that was
Yeah,
the
500
most
or less.
susceptible.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly right.
Wow.
They were
Okay.
targeted the most. They had the least. So why would a company with 10 to 100 or 200, 500 employees be more likely to be susceptible? Well, in those size companies, people are wearing multiple hats. They might be the
Yeah.
owner and the salesperson and the marketing person and the finance person and the HR person. They're wearing multiple hats. They're not big enough to hire a full-time cybersecurity consultant to help guide them. And so cybersecurity is often second fiddle. They may not have the resources and the budget to buy all the different security tools to provide early detection and prevention, right? Intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, a SIM, a SOC, monitoring tools, all of that are absent in most of those companies, right? So they don't have a great big technical stack, which means it's easier to breach them and do what you want and then hold them accountable with extortion, right? Ransomware, double
Yeah.
extortion is happening today where if you can restore your data from backup, you got your encrypted files back. So I can't extort you for that. But I've already exfiltrated your data to the internet, so I can now start to release your customer data to the internet, whether it's HIPAA, PCI, whatever, financial, any of it, legal, accounting firms and law firms have been breached and they're threatening to release this privileged information to the internet, to the public, embarrassing the law firm into paying that ransom. So even though they did a good job of backups, they're still extorted. It's called double extortion, and they have to pay that ransom anyways.
That's what this is like an industry that I know so little about. Like the fact that this is such a huge thing going on, I think
It
most
is.
people don't realize the importance of learning these things. What about, I'm curious, what about like for individuals, right? What are some simple tips that you can maybe give to like I said, the individual populations that aren't maybe working for big it sounds like a lot of corporations, right, are being targeted here. Like,
Well,
what
that's
about
where
those
there's some good news, right? CyberHoot is trying to teach 1 billion people. That's our BHAG, right? I don't know if you ever heard
nice,
that big, hairy,
nice,
audacious goal, a billion
nice.
people. And so we're going to give it away free to individuals. So if you go to cyberhoot.com/individuals, you can get our foundational 6 videos and a hoot fish and potentially some more videos and more phishing simulations, not fake emails that are going to trick you. They're going to educate you and teach you the positive things you need to do to understand if you're under attack or not, so you can confidently action all your email without sweating it out or forwarding stuff to IT. We teach you how to phish. So that's free for individuals. So go to that URL, you can get that. But in those videos, you're going to have to take action, right? Because we start with phishing and we teach you all the phishing skills. That's just knowledge in your brain that helps protect you. But there are also tools that you have to adopt in order to prevent password breach, for example. Because today I have 400 or 500 different accounts, and I have unique passwords that are 20 characters long on each of them, and I don't know any of them except for one, the master password to my password manager. Now,
Mm.
this is a lesser of all evils. And I say that because no software ever written's been perfect. And there could be a bug in a password manager, and there has been in the past. But by all accounts, whether it's NIST in their guidance, National Institute of Standards Technology in the US, or cybersecurity researchers or hackers, everyone knows that if you're in a password manager and you're doing your due diligence, you're going to have unique passwords everywhere you go. So when I breach a website out there and I get hold of one of your passwords, it has zero value for me to target you in other accounts elsewhere.
Nice,
But
nice.
yeah, I can look up your oldest password, your oldest email address today in a couple of databases. We also include this in CyberHoot. I can find your favorite passwords that you've used in the past, and then I can use those to try and target your current accounts, your email, your bank, your whatever, your SSL VPN, and I can maybe get by you. I've been a part of three major breaches this year in 2025 in my company because we have a virtual CISO offering where we provide incident response, and we also build cyber programs. We do risk assessment, that sort of thing. And three of them, almost all of them, tied to weak password hygiene. One, an email account was breached, and then a wire transfer was interjected to the wrong destination. So $100,000, poof, gone. Another was passwords on a VPN that weren't two-factor authenticated, and someone found a password over here, they used it here, and boof, guess what? We have all your data, we encrypted it, we exfiltrated it, pay your ransom. And the other was a third one was another ransomware, where again, business email was compromised somehow, and they inserted different wiring instructions. So, uh, number one rule of thumb, if you ever have to wire money, always call to validate the destination, no matter what, even to set it up. And if it ever changes, then you call again to make sure that you're talking to the right endpoint. Because in these cases, one part of the connection was cut off and moved to a hacker domain and email account, and sort of saying, no, don't send it over here, send it to me over here, because this is the new bank account that's appropriate.
Oh wow, because they hacked in, they are now turning out to be like a third party where like the original end
They're
receiver is
controlling
no longer getting it. Now they're
they're
controlling it
controlling the
also.
email communication, and they know how the person talks, they know how they write, they impersonate one side of the conversation. They say, oh, would you mind, we had to change bank accounts because our bank is going through some kind of uh, FINRA audit, and they can't be part of wires right now, so just send it over here, here's the new
Oh
account
wow.
information.
Wow. So always call and check. So these are a couple interesting tidbits here, right? Tips. First off, you said cyberhoots.com/individuals. Is that with an S at the end?
Yes, with an S.
Cool. We'll check
Free
in. We'll link it
training.
down below. So check that out. I mean, and then these are two interesting tips. One, if you ever have to send wire transfers, right, and you're communicating over email, call and verify, right, the end destination location. And then also, I like this tip that I sort of took was use a password management software, right? You
Yes,
say yourself, right? And I take it as like if you're doing it, that's reason enough for everybody else to be doing it, right? If the cybersecurity guy is that way, you said that you essentially only have one master password to the password manager. And then in there, like you said, if any one of those passwords gets compromised, they don't relate anywhere else. Because as we know,
exactly right.
everybody has used their favorite password for 10 years and they just keep adding symbols or making
Yeah.
slight adjustments. And
That's exactly
it's
right. And
it's
with a
nothing
few
new.
iterations, they can be cracked. I will tell your listeners this. If you adopt a password manager, I give you free reign to curse my name for the first week, which you will want to do because it's difficult at first. And then the second week, I'll tell you how you'll feel. You'll be like, God darn it, that Craig, he got me to do this, and I guess it's okay. I'm starting to understand it, but it's painful. It takes too much time. And then 3 weeks in, you'll be like writing me a little letter. You'll say, Craig, I can't believe I didn't do this for my entire professional career. I can't live without this password manager. It's made my life so much easier. Thank you. Every
That's
time I've done that with an individual, it's gone that arc. They hate me, they begrudge me, and then they're like, I can't believe I didn't do this a long time
That's
ago.
I like that. That's not a bad route to take. Craig, we're already starting to wind down on time here, but I want to touch on something that you mentioned before the episode, right? I had asked
Sure.
you some key lessons that you had learned in business, and you
Okay.
said that very passionate, committed people will inevitably disagree, and you say that that's actually essential to have in
It
business.
is. It is. You have to banter about good ideas. And there's more than one way to build a business and a company. And when you're both, we have four founders and we sort of have a plutocracy where we discuss how we want to build the business and what directions we want to go. And we've had some knockdown, drag out 2 hour, Zoom calls where we're like, I don't think it's that way, it's over this way. And we're like trying to get other parts of the organization to agree with us. And we're debating things and we're saying, well, where's the data to support that, right? It's a hunch. And so in any business where we all want the same thing. We want to be successful. We want to grow our revenue. We want to provide the world a better way of teaching cyber literacy. How we get there can be up for arguments. And when you have really passionate, committed people who believe in, the last book they read or the podcast they listen to, they have some really great ideas, and you have to be open to that. The best thing I would say is be a good listener. Ask lots of questions, because if you just force your idea on the other founders, they're not listening to you and you're not listening to them, and you'll get nowhere. If
Yeah.
you actually put your opinion and your ego aside and you listen for what they're trying to convey and you try to understand it to the best of your ability and you convince them, I've heard you and this is what I see you saying, and I understand your point. then guess what? A light goes on in their head. They're like, okay, I'm going to open the window or the door and I'm going to listen to you now and your opinion. And in the light of day, when those opinions have all been shared and understood, I'm going to promise you, you're going to get down that better path for your company.
What great advice, right? Like, because if first off, if you don't have people that are going to disagree, you're never gonna be able to find that unique perspective that you didn't yourself have, right? Or like you're never actually going to be able to discuss and find the very best outcome, right? They talk about the power of a mastermind, right? It's like if
Mhm.
you put two minds together, it creates this third mastermind, and that's sort
Oh,
of
I
what
love
happens
that.
with discussions and disagreements. But the trick is you have to ask questions, be willing to listen, and that then opens the other party to also being willing to listen and ask questions. And then eventually you find out who's right, wrong, or you find a better third answer, huh?
That's exactly right. There's a famous book that has a line in it, and I'm trying to remember who wrote it, but it's listen first to understand, then to be understood in a simple sentence. And it's a good way to lead your life with your family, your friends, and your business.
Listen first to understand, then to be understood. Yeah, put the other party first, huh?
You have to. Otherwise, most of the time, no one's listening to anyone. It's kind of like politics, right? They all want to be heard, but no one's listening. Yikes.
Yeah. Man, what a problem that is. That's a whole different can of worms to open up right there. Craig, I'm curious, right? So I talk about legacy a lot. What's your definition of legacy? And whether it's with CyberHoot or not, like what do you think the legacy is that you want to leave on this world?
Thanks for asking that. I don't get asked that question almost ever, and so I've thought about it since we talked originally about doing the podcast. And I think in almost all aspects of my life, I've tried to. The way I view legacy is you got to this world and it was a certain way, and you can leave it better and improved, or you can leave it worse and sort of denuded of what it gave you. And I try to take the approach, and this may sound, altruistic or whatever, but I try to make it a little better than when I got here. So from my personal life, my son and I do some fundraising for cancer. We've done that for 10 years. I'm a Toastmaster. I'm a Rotarian. I coach in hockey for, my kids all the years and volunteered. So community service is a big for me and important. And for CyberHoot, they donate to the cancer fundraising that we do and that sort of thing. So that's one aspect of legacy is, are you making things a little better than when you got here? In the grand scheme of things, and then also in the smaller scheme within your family. Family has always come first for me. And then in terms of the industry as cybersecurity as a whole, I really believe that there's been some bad detours that we've taken as an industry. And it's an immature industry, so you're always going to have to course correct. But this negative reinforcement approach is one of the biggest mistakes we've ever made. And it's a $6 billion industry focused on making better and better ways to prove people can't spot and avoid phishing by getting them to click. I think if I could leave a legacy, it would be to turn the positive reinforcement into the majority of training that we do. And then, leave 10% on the side that says, yeah, trust but verify. Once you give them the body of knowledge they need to have, you have to make sure that they're applying it, right? So that they're not clicking on things. So, yes, you can send that fake email test once a year, once every 6 months, but only after you've taught them the material. No different than if you go into a classroom on genetics and the professor says on day one, take out your pencils, we're having a quiz on what you don't know about genetics and what you do know, and fails everybody. And then at the end, the final test, everybody passes. See, I took them from this level of nothing knowledge to this level. Well, what does that prove? It doesn't
Uh,
prove anything except everyone is super anxious on that first day, and failing things isn't a good approach. That's my legacy, I think, or it's not mine. It's Chuck, Brad, the whole team here at CyberHoot is pushing and rowing in the same direction of trying to bolster positive reinforcement theory in psychology, in cybersecurity.
oh, Craig, I love that. Thank you for sharing both both sides of the coin. The for CyberHoots really bolstering this encouragement and positive reinforcement where you say the industry is vastly the other direction. And so how interesting, right? That literally it's based on your psychology background,
It
right?
really is.
Understanding that's like such a great way to go. I'm all about like encouraging more positivity in the world. And then also just on your personal side that you're seeing this holistic piece around legacy of, how can I at least leave the world in a better place? And it's my
Hmm.
favorite when people give answers like this because we're no longer in this piece of legacy in the world where people want their names on buildings or they want statues created of them, right? It's no, let me actually help this world. And you are doing it in multiple ways. And I just want to be one to thank you for it.
Well, my pleasure, Wayne. This has been a true pleasure for me. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Absolutely, Craig. Last but not least, what is just again, if somebody wants to get in contact with you or with CyberHoot, where's the best place for them to go?
You can email sales@cyberhoot.com. You'll get an autoresponder, or visit cyberhoot.com, and there's a place to book a demo or find out information. We're going through a revamp of our website. It's been a 10-year conglomeration of things, so we're going to redesign the whole thing in the coming months. So stay tuned for that. But you can always go to that cyberhoot.com/individuals and get some free training and some valuable knowledge there that'll help you navigate the two biggest risks you face from a breach perspective, phishing, social engineering, and password hygiene.
And that's a wrap, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Mr. Craig, thank you so much for sharing with me. Honestly, I think I told you after the interview, maybe it was in the recording, that this information I think is so actionable. These two huge takeaways for me, the simplest ones that he wrapped up at the end with, is one, learning about these phishing emails, right? They can be easily prevented. You just need to know how to recognize them. I think he said he has a 7-step process. Go learn it at cyberhoot.com/individuals. The link is down below. And then the second one is this password hygiene, right? Take his piece of advice and actually go get this password management software. Do yourself a favor, right? Be proactive instead of reactive. Everybody out there, thank you for being here today. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Please like and subscribe. Please share the episode with anybody and everybody that's going to get tons and tons of value from it. Until next time, my name is Wayne Veldsman, and you've been listening to Journey to Legacy.